The idea behind this spreadsheet is to illustrate the effect of frequent releases. So this is not necessarily comparing waterfall versus agile, though we will touch upon that, but it is to show the consequence of releasing more frequently. So let's begin by looking at the assumptions section of our spreadsheet. So we begin under the waterfall comment that we see that is most commonly the case. Waterfall projects run in a single release kind of fashion. The idea would be that we would conduct the activities of requirements and analysis and design and coding or development, and then finally testing with the results produced through a deployment at the end of that time. Contrast that with breaking the work up into releases, with the idea that we'll release a portion of a solution every 6 months. So we'll actually deploy twice during the course of this particular project. And then one more time, let's see what would happen if we were to release every quarter. So every 3 months, there we go, we'd be releasing 4 times during the course of the project. And finally, the last one is to speak about how we might do this if we were to prioritize. And the way to think about this is more of an agile approach, with the idea being that rather than focusing on activities such as requirements, analysis, design, coding, and testing, we look at how we would organize ourselves in such a way to deliver slices of work perhaps as frequently as every 2 weeks, but we would deploy every 3 months. If we approach our work this way, we can actually prioritize those slices of value, and that's what this column is saying. That if we release every 3 months, but we always are working on the most important things. And you'll see how that plays out in just a minute. So the project length for all of these, we're setting at 12 months. We're suggesting that development costs, the budget, is the same across the board for $5 million, and certainly you can play with this when you have your own copy of the spreadsheet. We're suggesting that the project is delivered over the course of 12 months. In the case of waterfall, it's delivered once. In the release every 6 months, it's released twice in every 6 months. In the case of the quarterly releases, every 3 months we'll be delivering, and we'll be doing the same thing in that agile approach as well. Now, something that I actually made a change to this spreadsheet as it was found on the internet, and that is to put in deployment costs, because they may not be inconsequential. So if we're going to, I've just arbitrarily put this in, if we're going to account for those, let's put in a meaningful amount. So I said that every deployment, every time we actually go to production, we're going to spend $50,000. So as you can appreciate, for the ones over here we're releasing every 3 months, we're going to incur $200,000 worth of cost because we're delivering more frequently. Nevertheless, we'll see how that all plays out in just a moment. Now, this particular row is interesting because it's where we talk about how the value is delivered. That if we see that 80% of the value is delivered at what percentage of the costs? And we would suggest in a waterfall approach where we really don't have a way to prioritize the work, what we're doing is organizing ourselves around our activities and the plan, that 80% of the value is delivered at 80% of the costs. But you'll see that that's in stark contrast to the agile approach, which suggests that we could work with what's known as the Pareto principle, that 80% of the value could be realized with as little as 20% of the actual cost. And again, this is an area that you can spend some time trying what-if scenarios on your own. This particular row here represents what we would consider to be the value of the final version per month. In many ways, you can think about this as the cost of delay that we've been talking about in some of my other presentations. This is the value that would accrue to the company every single month if we already had this solution. So what we're going to see here is that in a waterfall approach, we're going to begin accruing this at the end of 12 months, presuming that a lot of things happen, such as we hit the scope required and we hit the time frame. But if those things occur, then we would expect that we would start benefiting as a company to the tune of $250,000 every month. If we do that In the case of the release every 6 months, it will only be at the end of the 12 months that we'll get the full benefit of this. But because we're seeing this very much as a linear kind of relationship, we start to accrue some of the benefits upon the first deployment. And this is this just underscores the fact that regardless of our approaches, value is only accrued to the company when the solution is deployed. And then, of course, we see the same thing here for every 3 months, and we see the same thing here with every 3 months as well in terms of the Agile approach. We're suggesting that there's a life to this particular solution that's being delivered. We're saying that it's going to be 4 years, 48 months from the project start. Interestingly enough, that means that we're going to spend some of our time in the development, chewing up some of the life of this particular project, but that at the end of this 48 months, this 4-year period, we're expecting that we'll have to do something else, perhaps augment this particular solution or provide alternate solutions or what have you. But it's a beginning. And then, of course, we have down here is a discount rate we're going to use to calculate present values because we want to do all that. And there's an opportunity even to put in delays if there happens to be delays at different points. For the sake of simplicity, I've set this all to 0. And you'll see some key numbers down below. In particular, I can draw your attention to a few of them. For instance, that Waterfall has a break-even point after 33 months. So we've done our 12 months of delivery, and then at the 33-month mark, given the value that is delivered every single month thereafter, we're beginning to accrue value. You can see that if we release every 6 months, we start to accrue value 3 months earlier. If we do it every 3 months, it's earlier again. Not by a lot, but it is a bit. But interestingly enough, if we prioritize, there is a pretty notable difference in regards to when we break even. Now, this is easily overlooked when we see these things because these don't seem to be big numbers. But if what I can do is draw your attention over here to the picture, to the graph, because isn't a graph worth 1,000 words? Let's look at the break-even point where we're working on a waterfall project. And so at 33 months, we can see that we're just crossing the break-even point at that particular point in time. Whereas in the case of the release every 3 months has been prioritized, we're crossing $2 million. Now that is $2 million that the company will have accrued that will never be regained by a waterfall project. That we've been able to accumulate this level of value simply by delivering earlier and more frequently and taking advantage of the fact that we can do incremental deliveries and we're able to get some benefit from them much, much earlier. And I also want to draw your attention to the accumulated cash flow graph here at the bottom of the curve. Notice that we are spending money all the way through on our particular projects, and at some point they begin to turn around where we are able to start contributing value. And you can see that for Waterfall, that occurs after we've spent all of our money, again, presuming that we were able to complete on time and on budget, that we begin to turn this around and start to come to the good, so to speak, until eventually we achieve our break-even point. In the case of an agile approach, I'm going to use that as the other end of the extreme, we see that we've already been slowing down our spend because we have done a delivery. And we've done several deliveries before we're really able to start turning this around. Nevertheless, you can see that by this graph, this is a much less risky proposition because we're not spending the amount of money before we're able to start accruing some value and in fact even make decisions about whether it's worthwhile going on. Now, many of you have seen my earlier presentations where I discuss the visibility of Agile as one of its defining benefits. The fact that every 2 weeks we can see working software and make decisions about our go-forward strategy. Do we continue on course? Do we pivot? Do we make some changes? And we have a rich history now at Franklin of projects that have made course corrections and changes in regards to how they will approach release 2, release 3, and ongoing releases as they move forward. And I would suggest that that would even magnify this particular benefit. Nevertheless, my point in this particular recording is to illustrate to you that just simply by the fact that we are able to provide more releases more often, we mitigate our risk and we achieve value earlier, value that we'll never be able to catch up on, that will accrue to the benefit of the company. So the lesson to take away from this is that we should always be thinking about releases occurring 6 months and less, 6 months and sooner. And we should be thinking about organizing our work in such a way that we're doing the most valuable things first, and giving some real thought to what represents the value, and ensure that it is somehow validated when we finally hit deployment. Thank you for your time.